Anthony Ray Hinton is one of the longest-serving death row prisoners in Alabama history. He was on death row for 30 years for a crime he didn't commit. In 1985, there was a wave of violent robberies in fast food restaurants of the Birmingham area. Two restaurant managers, John Davidson and Thomas Wayne Vasson, were fatally shot in separate robberies. There were no eyewitnesses to the murders or fingerprints found at the scenes. On July 25, 1985, the third robbery happened at Quincy's Family Steakhouse in Bessemer, and 55-year-old Sidney Smotherman, who was a night manager at the restaurant, was shot but not seriously wounded. And he picked Hinton out of a photo lineup, identifying him as the shooter. Police also seized an old revolver belonging to Hinton's mother. Hinton was arrested even though he had no criminal record, successfully passed a polygraph test and had an alibi for the night of the third assault. His boss and fellow workers said that he was working in a locked warehouse 15 miles away at the time of the crime. When he asked the detective why he was being arrested, the detective said,
"I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it." He said, "But I'm going to make sure you found guilty of it." I said, "For a crime I didn't commit?" He said, "You must have a hearing problem. Didn't I tell you I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it?" He said, "There's 5 things that are going to convict you." He said, "Number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, I do not care." He said, "Number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury." And he said, "Do you know what that spells?" And he repeated the word, conviction, 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 conviction.
Even though there was no other physical evidence tying him to any of the crimes, the state firearms experts testified that the bullets from all 3 crimes had been fired from Hinton's mother's gun. The trial court authorized Hinton's attorney to spend $1,000 to retain a ballistics expert. The attorney couldn't get a qualified expert for only $1,000, so instead of requesting more money, the lawyer hired a retired civil engineer whose experience was confined to working with heavy artillery in World War II. The defense expert had no training or experience in firearms identification. He did not know how to use a microscope to examine bullets. He did not fire the weapon, and he admitted during cross-examination that he was visually impaired. He only had one eye. He testified that the results of his examination were inconclusive. In 1986, Hinton was convicted of double murder and sentenced to death. For the first 3 years he served as a prisoner on death row, Anthony Ray Hinton did not speak a single word. Until one day he woke up to the sound of an inmate crying as he had just got word that his mother had passed away. At that moment, Hinton realized that his mother was still alive and he needed to cope with the reality and fight to prove his innocence. Hinton wrote to Brian Stevenson, a Harvard-educated lawyer who founded the Equal Justice Initiative, a civil rights organization in Montgomery, Alabama that provides legal representation for poor prisoners and those who may have been wrongly convicted or denied a fair trial. And in 1998, Stevenson began representing Hinton. When his mother died in 2002, he was blindsided by grief and even considered hanging himself with his bedsheet. There was no hope or love, nothing left inside him to keep him going. But he heard his mother's voice telling him he must prove to them that "my baby is no killer," and that helped him continue his fight to prove he was innocent. Hinton asked Stevenson to find the best ballistic experts.
I said, "Mr. Stevenson, it has to be a white Southern male. The state of Alabama only recognized one of their own." And I said, "Mr. Stevenson, I need this white man to be the best of the best. I need him to believe in the death penalty, but above all of that, I need him to just tell the truth."
In 2002, all 3 experts examined the physical evidence and testified that they could not conclude that any of the 6 bullets had been fired from the revolver. Yet the Alabama courts persistently refused to overturn his conviction or grant a new trial. In February 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court vacated Hinton's conviction and death sentence and ordered a new trial. The court ruled that Hinton's trial lawyer had provided a constitutionally inadequate legal defense by failing to seek more money to obtain a qualified ballistics expert. The court also held that the trial judge had been mistaken when he said the defense was entitled to only $1,000 for an expert. The statute relating to such expenses, which at one time had a $1,000 cap, had been amended prior to Hinton's trial to allow for any expenses reasonably incurred, as long as the expenses were approved in advance by the trial judge. Subsequently, in preparation for a retrial, the prosecution had new experts re-examine the bullets and gun. The prosecution experts also concluded that they could not link the bullets from the victims to the gun found in Hinton's home. On April 2, 2015, a judge granted the motion by the Jefferson County District Attorney to dismiss the charges and Hinton was released. The case's dismissal only came 13 years after Hinton's attorneys presented testimony from ballistics experts that determined the revolver from his mother's home could not be matched to the crimes. Hinton was the 152nd person exonerated from death row since 1983. The EJI said in the statement that they believe Hinton's wrongful conviction was the result of the prosecutor's racial bias. Race, poverty, inadequate legal assistance, and prosecutorial indifference to innocence conspired to create a textbook example of injustice, Stevenson said. I can't think of a case that more urgently dramatizes the need for reform than what has happened to Anthony Ray Hinton. It took Stevenson and his team 16 years to have Hinton's sentence overturned and all charges dropped. Statistics from the EJI show that 1 in every 3 African American boys born in the U.S. will likely serve time in prison. In America, you are guilty the moment you were born black and male, Hinton says. If you're poor and you're black, the chance of you getting true justice is slim to none. Had it not been for God putting Brian Stevenson in my life, I would have been executed. But there's just not enough Brian Stevenson to go around. Hinton has turned his experiences into a memoir of his own. His book The Sun Does Shine: How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row was published in 2018. In his book, Hinton conveys all the horror of his years in solitary confinement, barely able to breathe in summer heat, eating food that tasted like dust. But something deep inside his character made it possible for him to make friends of everyone near him, from the white man next to him on death row who had lynched a black teenager to almost every single prison guard who met him. The Sun Does Shine is both a cautionary tale for all who think that a great nation can easily forget its past and inspiring proof of the inability to condemn a man's capacity for hope, love and joy.
Thank you, Jesus!